Hi there, knife people. Hello, lady and gentlemen. I'm wearing my coveralls because today is a maintenance day. And what I'll be maintaining is the knife that I carried for 2.5 weeks straight, nonstop, every day, all the time. And that is newly released 2024 production version of Benchmade McHenry and Williams Model 710. The knife that won the Wild West of EDC. Let's get this out of the way. My EDC profile is going to be different from your EDC profile for sure. I'm a knife tuber. I review knives and I hard use knives for my reviews. So you are definitely not going to be, well, I shouldn't say definitely, most likely you will not be stabbing a dead oak tree just to test the tip, disassembling the knife and removing some of the coating from the pivot area so that you can test the Rockwell hardness, etc. So I do all these things to knives. You probably won't. So unless you're a cement company worker that's going to carry it daily and open cement bags with it, you're probably going to go easier on this knife than I have. What we're going to need for today's maintenance is not much. We'll start with a good driver set with various bits. Although today we're only going to use a T10. We're not fully disassembling the knife for the maintenance. I carry two drivers on a full disassembly videos, but not today. You need some kind of pipe cleaner thingy, brush, a sharpened, and I'll show you what I mean by sharpened chopstick from a Asian food restaurant, some paper towels. I use sanitizer gel for cleaning and disinfecting blades. And we'll talk about lubricants later, but also you're going to need a little bit of Loctite. I carried this knife for about 18 days now straight. It was in my pocket every day. It was not the only knife in my pocket. I usually carry two. So, after the initial burst of activity involving tree stabbing, hardness testing, disassembly, reassembly, assessment of the components, it subsided and I carried it just like any other knife. One alteration from the factory configuration I made was flipping the pivot nut on the side opposite to the pocket clip, because when I work on knives, I prefer flat side to be down. I don't need to remove pocket clip every time. But if I did need to fully disassemble or remove the pocket clip, these are the drivers I would be using. Called Work Pro. They're less expensive than previous Satos that I was using, but they have about the same amount of capability. I don't recommend using bulbous screwdrivers of that nature. These short-handled screwdrivers, they're designed to lean in and exert as much torque as possible, which is not necessary with knives. And don't be fooled by branding of this set made in China. It's total junk. Well, today, as I mentioned, we're only using T10 to remove the pivot screw. And I developed a specific technique for using it. I loosen the threads and then push through, loosen and push, so that the pivot nut comes out on the other side, ready to be pulled out when I'm ready. I'm not ready here. So, once the screw is out, you should be able to pull out the nut without, pushing it with anything, just other than your fingers. And now the blade and possibly washers will slide right out. Sometimes they don't. Then I use these advanced techniques to knock them out, or use this invaluable yet free essential tool that came from my local Asian food restaurant called a chopstick. The tool, not the restaurant. Looking inside, you can clearly see that I did not use too much oil at the pivot, and normally I actually don't use oil at all, because after a knife that runs on bronze washers wears in, you should really not need any oil, but I leave it in for a break-in period. I highly recommend you do the maintenance after you feel that the knife is fully broken in. Let me illustrate using this time capsule 710 made in 2011. As you can see and hopefully hear, it's not the smoothest running knife straight out of the box, nor was the one I'm showing you today. So I left a little bit of oil to allow smooth wear-in of the washers. And as you can see here, the washers are not polished. All metals have a friction coefficient associated with them. However, that takes into account how polished the surface is. And obviously, the less polish there is, the higher is the coefficient of friction. Let's look at the overall knife condition. You can see a lot of pocket lint that accumulated over those 18 days. And I don't recommend compressed air for cleaning it out because, you know, you can inadvertently lodge the particle in something that needs to move, so you don't want to do that. Instead, I use this pipe cleaner, and it's reasonable quality, inexpensive, but, you know, they're not going to lose feathers inside your knife. So I bend it like this to make it a little thicker, and I go around, just clean out, brush out any kind of lint. I try to go around any crevasses and pins and such. I will even pull back the access lock to get in there. That engagement area is kind of important because if you have something stuck in the slot for the access lock, your knife may develop a vertical play if it's not fully engaging on the open position. And obviously the pivot needs to be also looked at. And as you can see, these bronze accent pieces, accent washers, they tend to stay on this knife. They don't simply fall out, which is good because this way you're sure they're not allowing any debris under themselves. But just in case, I clean them out using a Q-tip. I will not provide links to Q-tip. What the hell. If you want to help my channel, next time you shop for any of these items, please click the link in the description. This way I'll get 2 pennies from Amazon. Anyway, calling these bronze, I misspoke. They're magnetic, so it's basically steel that's coated with bronze finish, same as the blade and the pocket clip. I'll talk about pocket clip for a second in a little bit, but here I'm just cleaning them out, and probably absolutely unnecessary step. In fact, all the steps that I'm showing you are optional. This particular blade coating, while looking sexy out of the box, it gets dirty very easily and quickly, and I use my disinfectant gel to degrease it and clean basically, you know, fingerprints off. Sometimes if you cut a box with ink prints on them, it will leave black streaks. So alcohol-based gel works really great dissolving ink from cutting boxes. Also clean thoroughly around the thumb studs because that's where grease from your fingers accumulates. And let it sit for a little bit while I am cleaning my washer. So I'm basically degreasing. This is for the purpose of degreasing. Like I said, all the steps are optional. You can pick and choose what you want. And what I chose to do next is strop my blade. I sharpened it before. It is paper towel cutting sharp. But after a couple of weeks of daily use that included everything a knife would be doing on an everyday basis, I am concerned if I got any burrs, chips, rolls on the cutting edge. And a well-worn-in strop, which is smooth like this one, will actually tell you immediately if you have something going on with your edge, because burrs and rolls will show as scratches. I'm using a convex side of my strop that I made myself, just to get into this recurve. Anyway, I am super grateful to Benchmade for using S90V steel on this blade, and especially for heat treating it to a proper hardness, which was between 60.5 and 62, somewhere in that region. As you can see, it can cut still. I don't need to touch the edge with a stone. All right, already. Just stop. Enough. You proved the point. Anyway, I don't think Benchmade rendition of MagnaCut at their traditional, you know, like 59 to 61 hardness would hold the edge as long as this blade. And now I'm cleaning my stropping compound off. You really, really don't want to leave it on the blade that you will be using for any kind of food prep. And for crying out loud, keep it away from kids because they think it's some kind of chocolate bar of weird color, especially the red or black compound. Now I'm going to apply a triple action penetrating oil just to make sure I got everything that could be gotten off the blade. I just put a little bit on my fingers or a couple drops on the blade and then just smear it. You should be very careful, keep your fingers away from that edge. You know, if it cuts paper towel, you will be 1/8 of an inch deep into your finger before you realize it's cutting you. So be very careful and count the times that I have band-aids on in my videos, and you don't want to be that guy. Most knife reviewers have band-aids on one time or another in numerous scabs from recent cuts. Same coating on the pocket clip, same treatment. And the pocket clip is the weak point in this knife. It is designed so that it's hard to put it into a thicker material pocket. And so that tapping that you just heard, it's because I assisted with my thumb when I put it in, and maybe 1 or 2 times I went enthusiastic on it. All right, so I'm wiping it as dry as a paper towel permits, making sure I get all of it off, because while some of it is absorbed, you don't want to leave oil on your blade. It may be toxic as well. This is a 1500 grit sand belt that I no longer use on my belt sander. I'm going to use it to polish up my washers. Like I mentioned before, by doing this, I'm reducing its coefficient of friction. So the other way to say it, I'm increasing the metal's lubricity. So that allows me to avoid using oil altogether. Because once the knife is worn in and all the metal pieces in the pivot are sort of mooshed in together, basically burnished to the point where it operated as smooth as you saw it operate with a tiny little bit of oil, I'm pretty sure I can polish it the rest of the way and have a perfectly functional knife without any oil whatsoever. The reason I hate oil on pivots is because that's where the lint that you saw me clean out will eventually end up. And there's just not enough room in some of these designs. I mean, frame lock, okay, it'll push it out because of how strong that lock bar spring is. But access lock, push button locks, plunger style, pinch locks, they're more sensitive to lint being present. So oiling the knives that have them, probably not advisable, especially heavy oiling. Chris Reeve knives, for example, come with a lithium grease, which is not as sort of fluid, so it's very localized. But even his knives, I remove the grease after a while, especially if it's a user like mine, Cozy or Omnizon. And I'm just basically stropping it on the surface here. I'm not trying to get a mirror. If there are some kind of imperfections on the surface, I don't care. This is not a Beautify America effort. It's get your knife smooth effort. Some of the factory washers, in fact, most of the factory washers that you will find in a knife, they're pressed out of a continuous tape of thin metal. And when they press them out, there's an edge burr. So it's advisable to do this type of maintenance to begin with. Don't forget to clean out any kind of residue from the pivot hole. You don't want to drag it into your knife. I'm switching to the next one. And, I try not to go straight up and down the strap, but I'm not super hung up on randomizing my motions. All I'm concerned here is not to roll it on one side, which would be almost impossible to do anyway. So, like I said, everything you see here is optional. You can just go straight up and down if you have faith in your ability to apply equal pressure. Don't forget to clean out the pivot hole. And it actually also tells you if you have any kind of edge burr left from the factory rendition of this washer. And you can see it's a lot more reflective now. Now time to look at the pivot. Clean the pivot off. You want to pay attention to the wear pattern. Just keep an eye on them. See if anything is wearing deep grooves in it. If it does, it's probably cause for sending the knife back to the factory. Here I don't see anything alarming, so I am going to move to the next step. Before I do, let me give it another swab with the pipe cleaner in the pivot area, just to make sure. It's okay to be OCD, especially if you decided to be a sort of minimalist as far as lubricating your knife. And it's mostly to remove any oily residue that's left there from before I disassembled the knife. I don't see any. Just being a little bit obsessive here. Next, I'm going to disinfect the aluminum handle. This handle, while it's not particularly grippy, as I showed in my previous video, especially compared to, say, a Dira or Griptilian, it has these deep grooves. I think they should have made them sort of wider and maybe not so sharp, not so sharply machined, that is. I mean, it has no effect on your hand or fingers. It's just, you know, you can get stuff stuck into these grooves, you know, like I'm chasing some kind of piece of something there. I don't even know what that is. Maybe a oak tree bark from stabbing. Anyway, you just clean, disinfect the handle so that the knife feels like new when you start using it again. And now we're going to launch into maybe a more complicated part of this whole process, is putting the blade back in. A smart thing to do working on the knives with pivot accent washers is to make sure the washer is installed on your pivot nut first before you stick it back into the knife. Here's a quick 1, 2, 3 reassembly tip. Make sure that your pivot nut protrudes ever so slightly past the liner, just slightly proud of the liner on the inside. Don't go too far in. Once I'm satisfied with the depth of insertion, my index finger puts forward pressure on the D-nut so that it doesn't slide anymore. And then I attempt to sort of throw that washer in there and make sure it catches on the protruding nut. Once it's caught, you can now place the blade right over it. It slides right in because the second washer is not in there. And now, with the thumb of your left hand, pull back on the axis lock. With your right hand, align the pivot hole on the blade with the pivot and push up with your index finger of your left hand. If you went past the blade's surface, use your magic wand to push it back a little bit. Grab the second washer and slide it in. Use the side of the magic wand that you sharpened flat to push it all the way in so it lines up with the hole. And if you have problems aligning it, that means you didn't do a very good job sharpening your stick. You know, sticks precede knives as a weapon and a tool by probably several dozen millennia. There's no excuse for not being able to use a stick. So here I'm sharpening it as thin as I can without making it mushy, and then making it sort of wedge shape a little bit on one side. That is a perfect shape for what you're doing. And I am glad that I had this opportunity to show you my chopstick sharpening techniques. Once you roughly lined up your washer with the pivot hole, for final alignment, put the dull end of the stick and wiggle it in there, and it will line up. And voila, push with the index finger, and you're ready to wrap this part up. Place the accent washer into the cavity, and reach for your pivot screw and the locking compound. This is an important step that you should not miss. You should apply a very conservative amount of Loctite to the threads. And by conservative, I don't mean pro-lanyard or anti-flickability. I mean a moderate amount. And by moderate, I don't mean while being afraid to admit to your friends that you support the use of glass breakers on folding knives. I mean just one small drop. By the way, anyone who laughs at my jokes is automatically a friend of mine. So now I tightened the pivot pretty tight. I went all the way and tightened it, and now the blade won't drop shot. This was done on purpose. Bring your screwdriver back into the picture, carefully insert and loosen just enough so the blade starts traversing down. You're pretty much done. The knife is tight. There'll be no play side to side or up and down. It won't drop shot immediately because you disturb the system by moving washers around. So it'll need a couple days to wear in. Meanwhile, to remove any traces of penetrating oil, which may be toxic, grab some butcher block oil or gel and apply it liberally to the blade's surface. And by liberally, I don't mean on the left side of the blade only. By liberally, I mean in arbitrary, large amounts that make you feel good. As you can see, I'm rubbing it in. And by rubbing it in, I don't mean my humor. I mean the butcher block oil. This stuff is really good at removing blemishes from metal surfaces, but it also protects other materials like wood or certain plastics. I use it on my antique firearm collection all the time. And speaking of blemishes, here's one that I think I allowed some of that gel to dry up, so I'm going to use the same gel to dissolve it. And then I'll even scrape it with my magic wand, sharpened end, to completely remove that blemish. Now I'm just respreading that butcher block oil around so it's even everywhere. I'll grab my microfiber cloth to wipe the blade almost dry. You want a little bit of lubricity there, but not enough to attract dirt or sand or lint. And let the knife sit for a while. Close it up and set it down for a couple of hours because the Loctite is still settling. Done. And now I decided as an experiment to throw some funny outtakes in. Let me know what you think about that. Of Benchmade McHenry and Williams Model 710. A knife that will win America. That didn't make any sense. A knife that won the Wild West. That made even less sense. The knife that won a Wild West of Knife World. I know I can do it. Focus. The knife that won the Wild West of EDC.